a chair to the painting. So this is like 7 or 8 feet tall. This is Queen Liliuokalani. And the artist that's made this magnificent painting is my mother-in-law.
Wow.
And so I had her, I was going to do all of the royalty for Kamehameha and all the way through. So she's done Kamehameha and she's done Liliuokalani. I wanted big so that when we build the Heritage Center, when they came in, and there would be a gallery of all the monarchs. She's an extraordinarily talented painter. And I made reference to this fellow. This is Black Harry, the greatest orator. In fact, the Wesley's partner, a guy named Coke, said that when he heard Henry, he said he is probably the greatest preacher in the world.
Wow.
This is Wesley. You know, Charles and John Wesley went out and preached in open air and so on. So he was familiar with good preachers and a lot of preaching. But this guy was the best of the best. Wouldn't you love to hear him?
Yeah.
And then this is the fellow I referred to. This is Gilbert Tennant. The guy says, watch out for what kind of pastor you have. You don't want an unregenerate Pharisee. These are some. And then I don't have Whitfield's picture. I might have it somewhere. Let me see. I need to get. No, what you got. Okay. So we have. Okay. Lights, camera, action. Okay, I wanted to just mention the Haystack Prayer Meeting in background. This was the foundation. The Great Awakening showed that entire communities could be won to the gospel. The Haystack Prayer Meeting were young people. They were on, as I said, the clock was winding down. They felt they only had 200 years to get the job done. I love that sense of urgency. If we woke up every morning and said, you know, Jesus wants to fill heaven and empty hell. We only have so many hours, days to do it. We would live differently. So this was very much on the mind of Samuel Mills. Now, Samuel Mills must have been ADD because he just had his hand in so many different things. Once he started the ABC-FM, they started to send out missionaries to where? China, India, Burma. This was the American Missions Program. And so Henry's, I could just see Henry pulling on his shirt and saying, hey, let's remember where I came from. Let's remember those little islands out in the South Pacific. Forget about the billions in Asia. Let's go out to where they worship rocks and trees and stuff. And so Samuel Mills was quite impressed with Henry and did whatever he could. Well, Samuel Mills also realized that this whole slavery thing in America was an abomination to God. Every once in a while you get some anti-Christian people to say, well, you Christians have slavery in the Bible. You know, you justified slavery. And every once in a while you'll see a Hollywood portrayal as if Christians were responsible. Nothing could be further from the truth. It was Christians that abhorred slavery and did whatever they could. In fact, Black Harry, he would give them a spellbinding message, and then he would tie into it, you guys have to help get rid of the institution of slavery, or God will bring judgment. So this was common among Christians. They were abolitionists. So all these New Englanders that came to serve as missionaries here in the islands, they were all abolitionists. So we're going to give you a couple of quickie Black history points. Who did I say was the first teacher of the local children? The ex-slave from New Jersey. Betsy. Betsy Stockton. Yes. Betsy Stockton was the first. Okay, now listen to this. There was an inn where people could stay down in Waikiki. It was founded by a guy named Anthony Allen, who was himself an ex-slave. So think about Hawaii. The first school teacher for the most literate nation in the world was an ex-slave, black. And the first innkeeper, where would we be without tourism, was an ex-slave, Anthony Allen. And he also set up a place in Waikiki for sailors who needed health care, a hospital, more like a clinic. And that was Anthony Allen also. So first hospital, first hotel, first school teacher, all African-American people. Astonishing. Anthony Allen was a great friend of the missionaries, very cordial, very supportive, whether he was a part of the Christian background or not, I can't really say for sure. There's so little written about him, but he's been recorded. And Betsy Stockton now is a big celebrity at Princeton campus. Chris Cook, who's coming tomorrow, will tell you a little bit about that. And now they have Betsy Stockton Day and so on because they're very proud of the work that she did as an educator, as we all should be. So, going back to Samuel Mills, he was definitely bought into the idea of doing something for black Americans. Now, the difference between biblical slavery and, I'm sorry, am I moving in the wrong
No,
place?
that's good, you're fine.
The slavery we had in America versus biblical slavery is biblical slavery, first of all, was done at the maximum of 7 years. No one was born into slavery. They were either sold into slavery to pay debts, which was true here in America as well. It's called indentured servitude. You know, the first slaves in North America were white. They were in debt. And you remember Oglethorpe and those guys, they brought people that were out of debtor's prison. And they said, we'll give you a new life if you work hard and so on. So slavery was a very different thing, indentured servitude, which the Constitution talks about. So this is a big difference. Somebody who through debt or conquered or something winds up in slavery can look forward to freedom in 7 years. And generational slavery is cruel. I mean, the child is innocent child, very often taken away from the parents, all kinds of cruel things added on top of it. The slavery was not what the portrayal of slavery was meant to be for. And the Bible never says you should have slaves or slavery is okay. Just like many things in the Bible, it addresses institutions that were already in existence. Didn't necessarily say this is the way to go. So there isn't anything that you can defend slavery about from the Bible. But all of these New Englanders, Samuel Mills wanted to put an end to it. So Samuel Mills, the same guy who wanted to do the world missions thing, said, let's give black Americans that are free a choice to go back to Africa if they want to. And we think this will be good for them to go build their own community. And also for the African relatives that they have over there, they can show what they've learned and done and so on, and maybe they could elevate the status of whatever their society is back in Africa. So he set up what was an ongoing program. He raised money for it and so on, and sailed on a ship. And he set it up in Liberia, in Monrovia, and he said, okay, we want to give these black people an opportunity to start their lives over away from the institution of slavery. And so he did that. On the way back, he was 36 years old, he died. He passed away on the way back, and a great loss. But before he had passed away, a third program that he had was he said, you know, we need Bibles. He went down to New Orleans, traveled thousands of miles, carrying French Bibles, English Bibles, and something like 50,000 tracts. So he went down there, and of course the War of 1812 was raging. Remember, he started a prayer meeting in 1810. So he's down there, and he runs into Colonel Jackson, you know, remember him? In 1814, we took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down by Mississippi. Took a little bacon, and we took a little beans. We fought Bloody Bridge in town New Orleans. Anybody remember? It's an old gospel. So what had happened is it was very successful, but all of his work to set up the ABC-FM, they sent out guys to India, China, Burma, and other places, but he never really got it. So he was talking to Obadiah, and maybe I can wind up in the Sandwich Islands with him. Well, Henry was very excited about that. He had gone to Africa actually after Henry had passed. What happened, it's an unusual thing, but there was a volcano that went off somewhere in the world. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but when volcanoes really go off, they'll darken the sky. And so in New England, there was the summer that never was. And it was called that way. And as a result of that, everything was so, the sun was so blocked, everything got cold. In fact, it snowed in June in New England. And so the vermin that normally are out in the fields in the summertime all came into the homes. And they were carrying fleas on them. They carried the typhus bacteria. And so Henry Obadiah that summer got infected with typhus. And I traveled back to Connecticut last month, and I went to the house where Henry was cared for by the doctor and where he eventually passed away. And it's a touching story, which is in the book, if you have a chance to read it, but Henry was surrounded with Thomas Hope, who was there, and the doctor was caring for him, and a group of people at Cornwall. There were as many as 18 Hawaiians in this foreign mission school, as well as a number of Native Americans. And they all loved Henry. He was the most pious, the most on fire, most brilliant student they had. And so he was in the last hours of his life, and he turned to the doctor and he said, "I feel no pain. And I thought I would go home to Hawaii to bring the gospel, but I realized that he's calling me home. That's not going to happen." And he died with a smile on his face. And like many of those that have died in martyrdom, their death has been more of an impetus for the carrying on their mission than their life would have been. And so it was those people that had, like Thomas Hopu, Kanui, and these other Hawaiians, they just said, "We want to go to the mission field and go back to Hawaii." So it was a great inspiration. And they all carried out, many, many young people. So this was the...
26, right? Was he 26?
Yes. Well, they don't really know the exact age he was. It seems hard to believe that he had done all these things. You remember, he was up in the Aleutian Islands, he was in China, he was on the campus at Yale, he stayed with Timothy Dwight. He just did all of these things. But yes, 26, might have been 28 years old. We really don't know. But Henry had changed everything. And his memoirs, he just would write every now and then, were taken by his buddy, Edwin Dwight. Remember him? He met him when he was crying on campus. And he put them together, and he said, Henry would like his story to be known. So the memoirs of Henry Obadiah are reprinted. 1991, they reprinted thousands more copies. You can get them anywhere. They're worthwhile. I think they were giving them out at Ho'okelo Church. So don't go to Ho'okelo Church on Sunday. Come here. But I'm just telling you. They're probably right out. But these books are common and they're very inspirational. And Henry didn't write it to be an inspiration. He wrote it because these were his memoirs, his thoughts, his passion for the gospel. But Edwin Dwight said the world would be better off if they read his memoirs. So he got them together and he got it published. And Pastor Ka'eo is bringing a first edition. These things are priceless tomorrow. I said, don't put it in my hands. I'd rather handle the Hope Diamond than I would that. So just, if you want to show it to people, please do. So Ka'eo is coming tomorrow with the first edition of Henry's thing. But what happened is it immediately became a bestseller in New England. And so all of the churches got on fire. All the young people said, I want to go to Henry's place, and I want to preach the gospel, and I want to do what Henry did, and so it really ignited the fire. And so those memoirs are still available. But Chris Cook, the other fellow that I invited here, he's an author, he wrote the first authoritative book about Henry Obookiah. It's called The Providential Life and Legacy of Henry Obookiah. And so Chris is he's a great raconteur. You're going to love his stories. He's got millions of them. The one I shared about Levi, he just introduced me to, about the little baby that died. He's been researching this. His library is unequaled for what he has access to. He's got friends all over these tours to Connecticut, to the Cornwall School. Anyway, Chris is a great guy. So we want to give him a platform. I asked him to share on 2 sessions. So we have a session that he'll be sharing about the Tahitian connection I talked about, and he'll have maybe another one, maybe we'll give him a 3rd one. We don't know. You're going to like him more than you like me, so the competition is something I can handle. So one of the things that Samuel Mills did, in addition to that, is he realized that since he was carrying Bibles and everybody was carrying Bibles and they wanted to do it, that he needed to organize that. So back in his day, there were probably 50 different publishing houses printing Bibles. And so he coordinated all of these different small publishers into one effort to make the Word of God available for everybody. And it's what you and I know as the American Bible Society. That was another accomplishment from this young 36-year-old. So he has this thing going in Africa, he has the missions program for reaching the world, and he has the Bible Society. Quite a guy. So those are key people. I wanted to also touch on in the Great Awakenings, on your syllabus, it refers to old lights and new lights. See up there under Thursday, the first section. Just want to make mention, the old lights were the old guard, the Pharisees, to some extent, who just said Whitfield's doing it wrong, Jonathan Edwards is doing it wrong, Tennant's doing it wrong. You know, they were vociferous in their animadversion. They were constantly knocking these people, publishing editorials against this thing. And so there were people, as always, in the Valley of Decision who said, well, who's right? You know, are these established, well-educated Anglican priests and Methodist priests and so on, are they right, or are these new fiery evangelists right? So they decided to call the old guard the old lights, and they called the evangelists, the Whitfields, of the new lights. The reason, I mean, that's not an important thing to know, other than in your life, if God leads you to do something that you get criticized for, keep doing it. Keep doing it. God said keep doing it. Don't wait for everybody to approve of what you're doing. Right? I mean, we'd like it. We're all human. Our flesh loves the praise of men. But we're not here for the praise of men. We're here for God. So what happened early on in there is all of these guys got slammed. We don't need to reach the world. We need to civilize the world, and we can talk to them about going to church and stuff. It was all these visionaries who were going against the grain. And they paid a price. They were persecuted for it. So let me tell you about the resurrection principle. This is the most important thing that I can share this evening. Missionaries had come here, of course with high hopes. They had the little primer that Henry Obookiah and other Hawaiians had done to prepare them for the Hawaiian language. Then they were prepared to study and to learn. They were indoctrinated with the good message of servanthood, so that when the missionary wives came, they were prepared to do whatever they could to endear themselves to the local people. So people like Queen Kaahumanu, before she was born again, she was a very demanding monarch. And so she would say, make me a dress, make me this, make me that. And she was overloading all of these missionary wives with tasks to do. And so in some of their journals, they'll write about it and say, I've been working for 8 hours just on trying to keep up with the requests of the royalty. But they did it because they felt it was important enough to do to endear them to the royalty. So these all worked very, very hard. There wasn't the idea that the missionaries came and they said, oh no, they're showing too much flesh, we have to cover them up. It was rather the other way around. People like Queen Kaahumanu loved the colorful fabrics that they had brought and so on, and asked if they could have such clothing for themselves. So this was a little bit different from what maybe the popular myth is about the missionaries. The missionaries did not bring kiavi to the island so that the local people would wear shoes. That's a little bit. You just hear these things. And when I became a Christian in 1974 in Hawaii, I was visiting my mother. I had no interest in Christianity. I was raised Jewish. But I went to through the motions of being with my family and so on. My mother was totally immersed in Hawaiian culture, and she was a big fan of Michner. And so she kind of poisoned my mind about missionaries. And so I wasn't a Christian when I came. And then when I became a Christian, I said, well, I better keep my mouth shut about the missionaries because they were the enemy that the local people suffered under. And so for many, many years, until that voice, that still small voice spoke to me and said, people will not believe what I could do because they don't know what I've done. And that came to me, that was a pivotal point in my life where I opened my heart to say, okay, Lord, what did you do? You show me. And it's absolutely night and day from whatever the popular spiel is against the missionaries to really what happened. They were servants, they were self-sacrificing, and they were absolutely in love with the Hawaiian people. They did whatever they could. I want to just call your attention to this. I was going to have you read it on your own, but since I have a moment, it's the second page on the syllabus. It begins, it's a quotation. This is something that Rufus Anderson wrote when he summarized life in the islands. This book is free on Google Prints, Google Books, whatever it's called. Is anybody familiar with that service? You can go on Google and you can get books that are out of print for free. So I had this all printed out and two-sided print. I don't even know how to do that today, but I did it back then. Then I took it down to Kinko's, and they put this beautiful spiral on there. And so I got this book. But this is
What is the name of the
the book is History of the Sandwich Islands Mission. History of, and actually I have it on the bottom of this book, on the bottom of this page. But let me read this to you, and it's a painful thing to read, but the nice thing is that Rufus knew it was painful. But he says this in the first paragraph, and it's worth keeping in mind. It is not a pleasant duty to describe the moral condition of these islanders, as it was when Christian labor among them commenced. But the subsequent triumphs of divine grace cannot be appreciated without such a description. If you think you're going into a Polynesian society where everybody loves one another and everybody gets along, and you're going to get them to go to church and sing a few hymns, then you say, oh, okay, that's, I guess, why it became a Christian nation. But the reality of how life was, the life that Henry Obakaya lived, for instance, watching his parents killed before his eyes, seeing his aunt thrown off a cliff, knowing that all of these things were just the way of life. Here is some harsh realities about life before Christendom touched the islands. second page on your syllabus. You didn't get the syllabus? You can share with your husband. He's a very nice fellow. When the mission was commenced, the common people were at everywhere the lowest point of social degradation. They deemed themselves well off with a mat braided from rushes or leaves, a few folds of native cloth for a cover at night, a few calabashes for water and poi, a rude implement or two for cultivating the ground, and the instruments used in the simple manufactures. A species of arum called taro, and the sweet potato, with occasionally a fish eaten raw, constituted their usual food. The banana was cultivated to some extent, and a few coconuts and breadfruit trees grew here and there on the island. Their animal food was the flesh of swine and dogs. Dogs eaten only by women. A narcotic root called ava, why should that be there, ava, was much used for purposes of intoxication. We shall not be surprised at the poverty and degradation of the people when we contemplate their extreme moral debasement. Their licentiousness would be incredible but for the weight of the testimony. The intercourse of the sexes was all but promiscuous. Husbands had as many wives as they pleased, and similar liberty was allowed to the wives. The ties of consanguinity in marriage were disregarded. Indeed, it may be said that marriage and the family constitution were unknown. It was common for parents to give their children away to others as soon as they were born. Very few took care of their own children. As a general thing, there was no desire for children, and if a child was born, the parents were ready to give it away to almost anyone who would take the trouble of it. If no one could be found willing to take it, a very common practice was to strangle it or bury it alive. It was estimated by foreigners who came first among the people and had the best opportunity of judging that at least 2/3 of the children born died at the hands of their own parents. When Christianity came and people were born again, the love of God started to move in the hearts of people and awaken them to natural compassion that had for some reason been stifled. Missionary wives would have prayer meetings, and the women would come, and sometimes they would just break down and weep and weep and weep, which was a mystery to some of these missionary women. And finally, they'd say to the local, why are all of you women weeping and crying? And they'd say, for the children we buried. It dawned on them, after who knows how long, that what they had done was unnatural. It had caused the death of their own children. I was reading a doctoral thesis that fell from UH, and he had done archaeological studies in Hawaii, and he found out that before Captain Cook came in 1778, the population of the islands was already in decline. The parents are burying 2/3 of their children. If children are considered a bother rather than a treasure, if people are destitute and living in just abject poverty without motivation, populations will die off. So the doctoral thesis went over, and through charcoal measurement and other things, they could see these vast areas of terracing that had been neglected long before 1778. In other words, the population was shrinking. And we do know for sure that when the Western contact came to the islands, they brought all kinds of diseases. We also know that these diseases diminished the population radically after 1778. And so that by the time the missionaries got here, probably 2/3 of the population were already dead from Western diseases, for which they had no immunity. So it was a very heartbreaking thing to see the population shrink. And that's what's such a touching thing by Dr. Dwight Baldwin, because had he not provided some medical services, and I'm surprised because this is, 1830s and so on. He knew about quarantine, he knew about medication, he knew about vaccination. He thought of that as being kind of a late invention, but he knew about it. Trained Hawaiian people in it, and he just gave out, they vaccinated everybody, protected them from the whole thing. The last paragraph here, human sacrifices formed a part of the religion of the islands, and all had a superstitious apprehension of being prayed to death by someone or injured by enchantments. But the most intolerable part of the religious system was the kapu. Kapu is the same word as taboo, but the T, of course, being absent from the Hawaiian alphabet. Kapu. It made specified days, places, persons, and things sacred, and death was the penalty for its violation. Under the unnatural and cruel institution, men and women, husbands and wives could not eat together, and women, even the highest female chiefs, were prohibited on pain of death from eating the flesh of swine, several species of fish, and some kinds of fruits. If, by the reason of rank or otherwise, they might expect to escape the death penalty from men, or infringing the kapu, the priests taught them to believe that they would not escape the destruction from the offended gods. So there was a very powerful spirit of fear that dominated the society. So the idea that the Enlightenment had done is they said that people are corrupt because society corrupts people. And we can find a society where the corrupting influence of material gain and wealth and all of these other comforts of life were absent, we might find pure human beings. So the concept was called the noble savage. The noble savage. So there was a painter by the name of Gauguin, and Gauguin traveled to Tahiti thinking that there he would find the perfect noble savage. But when he got to Tahiti, you can see this in his paintings, he looked around and he said, you know what, there's just as much misery in Tahiti as there is in downtown London, downtown Paris. Why is that? Because, as the Christian knows, we're born in sin. We're conceived in iniquity. So there's no escaping. It's not society that corrupts us. We're already born in sin. So the Enlightenment came with their forceful ideas of people such as many of the founding fathers, certainly Thomas Jefferson and others. They got caught up in these Enlightenment ideas, and it was one of the things that the counteraction of the Great Awakening brought people back to. It was absolutely the opposite of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment felt that they were right on the brink of so much learning and understanding that they were about to enter into a utopia. And the Enlightenment, and we read about Rousseau and these other guys, Robespierre, they wanted to make a great world. Well, what happened, I want to be mindful of our time. How am I doing here? Okay, 5 minutes. Hey, this is important, but it will only take me a minute, and that is that in America, because of the Great Awakening, there was a foundation in America that said, we are sinners and we need to be saved. We need to be regenerated. We need God to circumcise our heart, to help us to love and to be what we can be. We need to be set free from our flesh and from the temptations of sin to live a new and victorious life. We need the power of the Spirit. Talked about Romans 8, where there is therefore now no condemnation under Christ that walk not after the flesh but after the Spirit. That's what we needed. Well, the Enlightenment had the opposite idea, that we can make a better and better world. Well, the United States, because of the Great Awakenings, were prepared to enter a revolution with a dose of reality that society doesn't corrupt, sin corrupts. The French did not have a Great Awakening. They killed the Protestants that were preaching. Huguenots they call them. And they did whatever they could to suppress the gospel, and they left it in the hands of the priesthood. Well, they had a revolution, the French Revolution. And what did they do in the French Revolution? Now, some people say the American Revolution, 1776, the French Revolution, 1783, these are similar. The people had different, expressions and how they carried it out. But no, absolutely not. The French Revolution, a revolution birthed in enlightenment, gave people the misguided belief that people could do right by themselves without God. So what happened to the French Revolution? Well, they stormed the Bastille. There were 6 guys in prison that killed them or whatever. That wasn't a big deal, but it was a representative thing. They finally took the king and killed the king. And then they turned it over. They had a motto: liberty, fraternity, equality. It sounded great, right? The fraternity was absent. Equality was absent. Every time somebody came up to the top, somebody says, "You're trying to be more equal than me," they killed them. 16,000 heads chopped off in the French Revolution. The people on the streets, whenever they got someone killed off that they thought was a bad guy, they would take the blood from his dying corpse and they would fill wine glasses and drink it. This is not the American Revolution. Nor is it a revolution with a Judeo-Christian foundation. This is where man goes without God. The French Revolution is similar to another revolution. It's the one that happened in the early part of the 20th century in Bolshevik Russia. What holds America together is Christianity. Without it, we could go the same course as the Bolsheviks, as the French, as anyone. It is the Judeo-Christian ethic, and I listen to people debate this all the time who have no idea what they're talking about. What's the basic difference? We Christians realize that people are capable of great evil. And they don't believe that. They think it was the Nazis that were capable of evil, but I would never do such a thing. Meanwhile, in America we have abortion. Taking the most defenseless people in our society and killing them for nothing more than convenience. You know, there's a wait list of 4 years for parents that want to adopt children. And there are people in their neighborhood that are killing children. Evil is resident within us. Unless we get regenerated, we will turn our society into a hell. That's the truth. That's what the Great Awakening are. And you know what? I'm going to end with this tonight. That very well-known verse, "If my people, which are called by my name," 2 Chronicles 7:14, "will humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin, and I will heal their land." That's a great verse. But you know, there's a greater verse that follows it.
Yes.
It says, once the land is healed, like it was in Hawaii, my heart and my eyes will be there perpetually. That's what got me really excited. I'm not talking about history because it will happen. I'm taking a promise that says if God ever healed the land, which he did in 1837 and 1838, he said, you can count on the fact that my eyes and my heart are there forever.
Thank you, Lord.
And he will do it again.
Amen.
And if I could share that message with the whole world, I would do it. And that's it. Tomorrow, we got a lot to look forward to, so fasten your seatbelt. Sister Barbara, I appreciate it. I am not as forceful maybe as I need to be, but this book is available for $20 on Amazon. You can, if you have a Kindle account, or you can read it online. I really recommend you do it. I wish I could buy it for everybody, but it's not mine to give away. It belongs to Dr. Walton. He's done a magnificent job. Again, primary sources. You're not going to get Michener's opinion or this editor's opinion or somebody who's pro this race or pro that race. This is the words of the people who lived it. Great, great resource. If you want to get a book on so this, and they're all listed in the syllabus on the bottom of the first page. Sun and Shield, Henry, Life and White, Lucy comes.
You try to understand that Mitchner wrote a novel.
Alright.
It wasn't, some of his novels do have a little story to it.
Oh yeah,
You
totally.
can't take it as verbatim.
No, but you'd be surprised how many people do it.
Yeah.
You know, Seabold lives next to the graveyard, and they come out asking for the characters that are in Michener's book. So he says, no, they're not real. Oh, I thought you said. Well, we're going to pray.
I'm sorry that, I know that, I'm sorry that I just, that the people that would quote Mitchner are so, they must be illiterate that they don't understand the novel. It's
Right,
make-believe,
right, yeah.
is what it is. It's make-believe, it's a fairy tale.
Let me just pray, okay? Let me just close. Father, we just thank you for the gathering. We thank you for truth. We thank you for the testimony of Henry Obadiah, for Samuel Mills, for Edwin Dwight, for Timothy Dwight, for Betsy Stockton, for all of these people who said, Lord, hear my, send me. I'm asking your blessing. May we be that same group of people who are just the same. And we ask, Lord, hear my, send me. We thank you for this. Bless everyone in rest and refreshment in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.